Everybody. Thanks for coming. You guys hear me okay? Hmm. Oh, I see. Just having some challenges with my audio not working. So give me just a sec. All right, I think we're good. Hello, everybody. I haven't already said hi to. Glad people are rolling in.
Hello, Jacob.
Morning or afternoon, I guess. Hey, Seth, how are you?
I'm doing well.
Good to see you. I just went ahead and made you co-host, Seth, so that way, permissions aren't an issue. You can just do what you need to do.
Now that is mute.
Okay, now you're live.
Seth, we have a decent amount of folks registered for this, so I imagine we'll see a lot kind of rolling in the next few minutes. You just let me know when you're ready to get started, and we can go ahead and jump right into it. So,
Okay, great. I'll make sure I can get my screen shared and everybody can see it, and we'll give it a minute or two.
okay, sounds good.
Jacob, can you see my slide deck now?
Yeah, absolutely. Looks good.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah.
Who texted their mother?
Just real quick for all the members in attendance, thank you all for being here. I just ask that you remain with your mic muted until you are called upon for a question or something like that, just to cut down on the background noise during the presentation. So thanks again for all being here, and it's going to be a great seminar with a lot of information.
All right, Jacob, I think I'm ready to get going. I've got the chat
Right.
open as well, and I should be able to see if people raise their hand. So
Perfect. Go for it.
all right. Thanks, everybody. My name is Seth Miller. I'm with the Washington State Department of Retirement Systems. Appreciate the opportunity that Jacob presented or provided to present to your organization. Just providing some updates on things that are going on at DRS. Also, have a few kind of deeper dive topics, and I might as well pull up the outline of the agenda. So I'll give a little bit of just kind of general background information or kind of some statistics that oftentimes people have questions about or things that come up. And hopefully, if we haven't already shared the slide deck with you, I've made it available to Jacob, but we can share it with anybody that is interested in it. I've tried to provide links for references. Anytime I've pulled data from other places outside of DRS, I've tried to include that as well. So you'll have that for reference. But we'll start off with a little bit of an overview. Then we'll do a couple of deeper dives on subjects that people may have questions about. And at any point, if you want to drop a question in the chat or raise your hand. I'm getting pretty decent at doing presentations over Zoom. Not always the best though, but I'll keep an eye on the chat and the raise hand feature and pause, and certainly open to this being a discussion. Don't want it to just be a presentation. So we'll do a little bit deeper dive on the way the Plan 2 and 3 COLAs work. We'll do a little bit more discussion on pensions and survivors. We'll talk a little bit about the unfunded liabilities in Plan 1 and how that impacts employer contribution rates. And then I'll provide a little bit more information about just what's going on how to get information to DRS for retirees. And then I know we recently posted some information about some potential unsolicited contact that some of our active employees have been receiving. So I can talk about that and give any additional information or provide or answer questions about it as well. So we'll talk about just a little bit overview. One of the frequent questions I get is just how many people are in each plan, where they're at as far as some of the closed plans, as far as still number of active people working versus number of people retired. So I just threw up some data here. This comes from our annual financial report, which is always available. The most recent one is always available on our website. Usually comes out in the fall. The most recent one just came out in the last couple of weeks. So just for reference, sometimes when I talk to a PERS Plan 1 member on the phone who's still working, they believe they are the last one still working. That's not quite true, though. If I was talking to a left one active person, they might be the last one. It's getting very close. There's just almost less than a handful of those folks still actively working, but lots of retirees in all of those plans. So, but just for perspective, I wanted to include that slide for you. And then I think a common point of confusion for folks, just kind of understanding the basic pension formulas for the different tiers of plans. So Plan 1, Plan 2, Plan 3. So I've just included this for general reference in case you're unfamiliar, but for Plan 1 and 2 members, the general basic pension formula, 2% times the number of years you work times the average monthly salary. So the way I like to think about it is if you work 25 years, you'll get 50% of your salary. There are some slight differences there where Plan 1 members have a cap on the number of years of service that they can add to their benefit. So that cap is 30 years. However, for Plan 1 members, their average salary is only averaged out over a 2-year period, and they're able to include cash outs of leave at the time of their retirement. So the next slide, I just included an example. Basically, one person, or maybe three different people with the exact same scenario, but in the 3 different plans, what would their retirement pension benefits be? So if the person worked for 10 years, had 10 years of service, they had an annual salary that increased $2,000 every month, but the average is, $2,000 every year increased. The average would be $60,000 for the year, or $5,000 over 60 months. And then this person also cashed out vacation leave. And so the 3 separate examples of the pension benefit. So the exact same scenario, exact same work history for a Plan 1 member, they would receive $1,110. Plan 2 member would receive $1,000, and that's because that average salary is over a longer period of time, so that average salary is a little bit lower, and they didn't get to include their leave cash out. And then Plan 3 member, 1% times the years they work, so half of what the Plan 2 member receives, so $500. But then they also have their investment account, whatever money they put in, how much, whatever percentage they chose, and whatever they invested in during that time period, and however the market did, can make that investment account any number really. And so I didn't want to estimate or put a projection there, but it could be all over the place depending on what the individual chose. So So I see Jacob also sent out the PowerPoint for folks. So that's great. So if you want to follow along there, you can as well, or you can read it later when you want to refresh yourself. So I just wanted to take a little bit of a deep dive onto the way the Plan 2 and 3 COLAs work. This used to not be that common of a question, and then when inflation started to go a little bit crazier, people were asking lots of questions about COLAs, and so we've put out a lot more information on COLAs on our website over the last year and a half to try to do some more education for folks so they can watch a video explanation or read some additional information. So I'll try to provide a high level description of the way the COLAs work for Plan 2 and 3. So the COLAs are based on the Consumer Price Index for the greater Seattle area. They can be up to 3% annually, but if a person receives a COLA that would have been more than 3%, that extra amount, the amount over 3%, is banked for a future year when inflation is below 3%. And I'll walk through an example of what that looks like. But for folks who are in Plan 2 or 3, that can be beneficial information to know that even in times of higher inflation, that they're saving that COLA for down the road, which can be beneficial when inflation is lower. They'll still get a bigger raise. So what can be really confusing is that the COLA is actually based on the actual consumer price index, which is just a number. And it's based on the consumer price index for the prior 2 years and how that changed. So the COLA that was calculated in 2018 was actually based on the change in consumer price index between 2016 and 2017. And so when inflation was really high the first year, people were wondering why the COLA was so much lower than what they were seeing reported on the news. And that was because what was being reported on the news was the current consumer price index instead of this more backward looking kind of historical change in inflation. So I used actually real numbers here from the consumer price index. But what happens every year is these numbers are published by the federal government. And then we just compare the consumer price index from the prior year and the year prior to that. So in this case, the ratio between those two numbers is 1.033, which is 3.3%. So that 3.3% change. That means that people who are getting that 2018 COLA would get a 3% COLA, but that extra 0.3% was saved for a future year when inflation was below 3%, and then that would be added on to their COLA the following year. So here is an example kind of how that looks for folks. Depending on when they retire, also determines when they're eligible for a COLA. So to be eligible for a COLA, COLAs are paid in July, but you have to be retired for a full year. So if a person retires in July, they're eligible for the next COLA, their first COLA the following July. However, if they retire after July, so August, September, October, November, they wouldn't be eligible for a COLA the first July afterwards because they hadn't been retired for a full year, but they'd be eligible for a COLA the following July. But in that case, they would miss that COLA for the first July, but the COLA they missed would actually be banked for a future year. So in this example, assumed that a person retires July 2024 versus a person who retires July 2023 is when they retired versus September 2023. If they retire in September, they're not going to get their first COLA until 2025, but they get that COLA banked. So for both of these folks, in 2024, if it's a 3% COLA, if it's a 2% COLA, we're going to assume a 2% COLA in 2025, a 1% COLA in 2025. So in 2024, the person who retired in July gets the 2% COLA, but the person who retired in September doesn't get any COLA. But their 2% COLA is banked for the future year. And then in 2025, the person who already had a COLA, who already had that 2% COLA, the person on the left would just get a 1% COLA. But the person who did not receive their 2% COLA. It's banked, it's added to that 1% COLA, and then they get a 3% COLA in 2025. So this is oftentimes, we hear from Plan 2 members or Plan 3 members who retired in different years, and they wonder why they got a different COLA than their spouse or their neighbor. And it oftentimes has to do with the banking from what they previously earned. But this is a very simplistic example. The numbers are usually not so perfectly round like that. But the good thing to know, just to keep in mind with inflation being relatively high, is right now people are banking really big COLAs for future years. So I mentioned we have more information on our website about COLAs. I've included some links, a link to a couple of different videos we recorded that explain this and show this and kind of walk through different examples for people who want to see that information. It also talks about when they're eligible for a COLA. And then a few more links about where you can find the CPI, the Consumer Price Index, on how inflation is calculated. If people are interested in historical inflation, they can find that at the link, and then also the RCW. This is specifically for the teachers' retirement system, RCW, but the language is the same for all of the different plans. Thank you. I saw a question came through. Yes, this COLA is different than Social Security. That's also a point of confusion oftentimes. They have different rules and are applied at different times. And so that can certainly cause confusion. The COLA I'm talking about is just the state plan COLA, the state plans, PERS, CSRS, TERS, plans 2 and 3 COLAs. And then I guess the other thing I should have mentioned is that currently Plan 1 does not have a COLA built into the plan. The plan was not initially designed with a COLA. So any COLAs that are granted to Plan 1 members are given through legislative approval. And so they can be added on at any time in the future through legislative action. But that's something that is not currently defined. There's not a formula for it, is what I'm trying to say. So it could be a different amount or a different cap or a different calculation depending on what is decided through legislation. All right, I'm going to pause for just one more second and take another drink of water and see if there's any additional questions that come in. Okay, great. So I'm going to talk for a little bit now about beneficiaries and survivors. This is another really common question that DRS gets that causes confusion for folks, because these two terms sound very similar and oftentimes can have some overlap in who fills these roles in your life. So we've created some graphics, and I just pulled these straight off of our website, but sometimes people can't find them easily. So I wanted to share with you how we make these definitions for your retirement plans. So a beneficiary is a person that if you pass away, they're going to get a lump sum of money. And while you're actively working, that is just whatever contributions you put into the system. So if you worked for 3 or 4 or 5 years, you were contributing into the plan, and you pass away before you retire, you hopefully when you started work, you filled out a form of who you wanted to list as your beneficiary. And then DRS will pay those remaining contributions to whoever you listed there. It works similarly when you retire. We are first paying your pension benefit, out of the contributions you paid into the system. And so if you pass away just after 6 months of being retired, we haven't paid you out as much as you paid into the system. And so whatever money is left gets paid to your beneficiary, whoever you've listed as your beneficiary when you retire. Usually those contributions that you put in last somewhere between 3 to 5 years. Once they run out, it's no big deal. We're going to keep paying you your pension for the rest of your life. Even if you live to 110 or 120, we're going to keep paying you that pension every month for the rest of your life. But when you pass away, your contributions will already have been exhausted. So there's not going to be any money remaining to be paid to your beneficiary. So that's beneficiary. Survivor. A survivor is someone who does receive an ongoing monthly benefit after you pass away, but you can only list one person as a survivor. Most oftentimes this is a spouse, and about 40% of people list a survivor when they retire. So what this means, though, is that DRS is going to be paying out that benefit over the course of 2 lifetimes instead of 1 lifetime. And so since we're paying it over a course of 2 lifetimes, we need to lower the amount we're paying every month so that we pay out the same amount over the course of those 2 lifetimes. And this graphic shows what that looks like. So we just selected an average monthly benefit. $2,122 is the average monthly benefit. So if you just take that for 1 lifetime, when that person dies, when that retiree dies, there's not an ongoing benefit for anybody else, a monthly benefit for somebody else. But they'll have an option when they retire. They have an option to choose a survivorship option, and if they choose a survivorship option, this is what we call as options 2, 3, or 4. They could provide a 100% survivorship option, a 50% survivorship option, or a 2/3 survivorship option. So in this example, if they chose the 100% survivorship option, while the first person's alive, while the retiree's alive, they're going to receive $1,763. So a lower amount, but it's going to be for the rest of their life and whoever their survivor is. So if they pass away, their survivor is going to continue. You can go down to the bottom in the purple there. That's what the survivor is going to receive. They're also going to continue to receive $1,763 for the rest of their life. If this person were to choose the 50% survivorship option, option number 3, they'd receive $1,926 for the rest of their life while they're alive. So it's a little bit less than the full just single life amount, but it's a little bit more than the 100%. Because when they pass away, their survivor is only going to receive half of what they were receiving. So it'll go from $1,926 to, for their survivor, they're going to receive $963. So hopefully that makes sense. So survivorship options are really only applicable when a person retires. This is an irrevocable choice in most cases. Now, a divorce or a person survivor passing away can change these things. But in general, this is a decision that a person's going to make when they retire. I guess one other thing I should also say is that if a person chooses one of those survivorship options, so let's say they chose option 3 and they're getting $1,926 every month. If their survivor passes away, DRS will contact them and say, we're going to increase your benefit back up to the $2,122 because now we know we're only paying it out over 1 lifetime. So that person receives that amount then for the rest of their life going forward. So I'm going to pause here again for a second, see if there's any questions before we move on to the next topic. There was a comment. I do want to also make sure that people understand this is a very personal decision. It really depends on what the finances are of a couple. If we're talking about a spouse as your survivor, if a person has a pension benefit, if both people have a pension benefit, on whether or not they choose a survivor option. But if you choose a survivor option, it doesn't have any impact on the other person's pension. Sorry, a few questions are popping in now. So a good question regarding if you can choose someone else as a survivor after someone passes away, or if you don't choose a survivor when you start, what options you have. The real key is if you get married after you retire, you can add that new spouse as a survivor between the first and second year of marriage. So if I was married, I retire, my spouse passes away, at some point down the road I get remarried, I can add that new spouse as a survivor after we've been married between 1 and 2 years. It'll once again reduce my retirement benefit because then the benefits can be spread over 2 lifetimes, but you can add a survivor. And so similarly, if I retired, I wasn't married at the time I was retired, but I at a later date get married, I can then add that spouse as a survivor between the 1st and 2nd year of marriage. And DRS can provide you an estimate of what the change to your retirement benefit would be if you did that. Can I choose one else? Lots of questions along that same line. I think I got all that. And then Jacob is emailing a PowerPoint deck, and all of this information is also available on the DRS website. You cannot add a child as a survivor if your first survivor dies. You can the only time the IRS allows for a change to this is if it is a qualifying event, and the qualifying event is marriage. So if you're married, you can add between the 1st and 2nd year. And then there was also, I'm sorry, did not mean to do that. Meant to be scrolling back up. There was a direct question that came in to me, sort of unrelated, regarding annual statements, as far as what is in your retirement account. All of the information for folks who, before they retire, is available through a person's online DRS account. And DRS, if you call DRS, we're certainly willing to print that out and mail it to a person if they need it. But what we found is that by the time the annual statement went out, it was out of date. It was information that was dated because of just the time it takes to create that data, print that data, mail that data. There was already new information available in a person's online account. So we want people to look up their information in their online account because it is the most accurate and current information that DRS has. I think I understand. There's another question that came in directly to me. I think I understand the question. Regarding the survivorship option, if you're married, the default option actually is 50%. It's the joint 50% option. That is the default by state statute. And because Washington's a community property state, that is the default if somebody's married. And if a retiree is not going to provide a survivorship option to their spouse, if they're going to choose option 1, the spouse has to sign consent, basically, that they are giving up that 50% survivorship option. So it really is the spouse of the retiree who gets to make the decision on what the survivorship option is, or I should say, they have the right of refusal, maybe is a better way to say it. But they have the ability to not consent to giving up their 50% survivorship option. If a retiree is going to provide any of the other survivorship options, the spouse does not need to consent because it is more than the default option. Hopefully I answered that question. I'm going to pause again just for 1 second. I think I got all the questions that came in before we move on to the next topic. All right, great. So another question that I often receive or people often bring up is about PERS Plan 1, Public Employee Retirement System Plan 1, and Teachers Retirement System Plan 1, about those plans being unfunded or underfunded. That is true, but only probably for a short time going forward. So just for your reference, And so I apologize, this slide's a little bit blurry. I had to copy this information from the state actuary's office, some presentations they gave, and I didn't have access to the source document, so I wasn't able to clean it up a little bit. But the way this works is for contributions for folks who are actively working, and we'll just go across the top line right now on the chart here. For people who are actively working in the PERS system, and we'll just say for PERS Plan 2 in this case, the employee, so on the left-hand side, it says employee in the orange there. The employee is paying in 6.36% of their salary. They're paying that into the PERS pension system. And then on the right-hand side, the employer is paying also in 6.36%, but they're also paying in 2.97% for the unfunded liability in PERS Plan 1 specifically. So in this case, the employer is paying in almost an extra 3% of salary to pay down the unfunded liability that currently lives in PERS Plan 1. Similarly, this is happening in the teachers' retirement system, where the employers, and this has been going on for quite some time, the employers are paying in extra money to bring those plans back up to fully funded status. They are very close to getting them fully funded. The projections are sometime in the next year or two, or maybe 3, but likely in the next year or 2, these plans are going to be back to completely 100% fully funded. But in the meantime, the employers have been paying in extra contributions more than the employees have been paying in. And one of the reasons I want you all to be aware of this is sometimes people think that the employees are having to pay in extra contributions to bring up the unfunded or underfunded status of Plan 1. That's not the case. This has always been the employers that are having to pay the extra contributions to make the plans back up to fully funded. And so along those lines, because the plans are getting close to fully funded and very soon will be fully funded, what I've included here is a slide that shows what the employer contribution rates are for the current 2 years, the following 2 years, and then the projected contribution rates for the following 6 years in 2-year increments. So the 3 bienniums going forward. And you'll see pretty significant decreases in how much the employers are going to have to pay in contribution rates. And the big reason that is because the Plan 1s are going to get fully funded and the employers aren't going to have to pay that extra amount anymore. But the other reason that that's happening is that because the plans have had what they call positive plan experience. So they previously were expecting investment returns to not do as well. They've done a little bit better than expected. People haven't lived quite as long as they were expecting people to live. So a number of different reasons have caused the projected contribution rates for employers to come down to kind of what the normal expected long-term rates are, about between 5 and 6% for most of the plans. So this is good news for budgets across the state, for the state's budget, for city and county budgets as well. And also you'll see similar decreases for the people who are actively working, how much they're going to be needing to pay into the retirement systems going forward as well. So this is, once again, overall really good news as far as what folks are having to pay into the pension systems. I don't think we expect the contribution rates to go down much below what's there projected out into 29-31 fiscal biennium. I'm going to pause here just for one more second. Okay, great. I don't see any more questions coming in. Maybe that wasn't a topic that needed to be covered, but that's okay. Just hopefully good background information for you to have. And then the last couple of slides just about staying up to date with DRS and different ways you can interact with us or get information. I already mentioned a little bit about our online accounts. Really the best way to get information from DRS is logging into your online account. There's a picture there of where the login button is. and how you can get to that information. There's lots of information there about being able to estimate what, for people who aren't retired yet, how they can estimate their retirement benefit. For folks who are already retired, there's lots of different ways you can update your information with DRS Online. So if you move, you can update your mailing address or your phone number, your email address. If you don't have a survivorship option and you just have a beneficiary on your account, you can update your beneficiary information. Probably the most, excuse me, the two most common things that folks are updating, bank account information. So if they switch banks or get a new bank account number with the same bank, they can do that through their online account if you have your old bank account information. And then changing your federal tax withholdings. So oftentimes when people have been retired for a few years, they find out, or they have to start taking their RMD, required minimum distributions, out of investment accounts. They find that they need to have more or less withheld from their pension checks. And so they can do that online through their online account. They can change what their federal withholding is by completing the new, what's called the IRS W-4P form. We have an electronic version where you can just fill that out and the information just feeds into your DRS account. All right, the last topic that I wanted to talk about before I open it up to additional questions, and please feel free to put questions in the chat. If you're not signed up for DRS news alerts, you can do that on our website, and we'll, anytime like a new article posts on our website, you'll get an email about it. It's a great way to just to stay in touch. We send out information about when pension payments are going to be made each year. All sorts of different information can come there. People who want to follow the legislation that's happening associated with retirement accounts, that's one way they get that information. But a recent announcement that we sent out was around potential fraud. I feel a little bit uncomfortable using the word fraud specifically in this case. There was definitely some unsolicited calls and emails offering financial planning services to folks. Sometimes that just comes from a very overly aggressive financial planner who's a legitimate business in Washington State. But we did feel like there were some cases where people may not have been legitimate business, that they may have been either trying to gather personal information or trying to get bank account information or trying to get somebody to roll money over, things like that. So we made a notice just so that folks are being cautious. You know, if you're contacted with those sorts of services, it's a great idea to do some research to determine if they're a legitimate business in Washington. Ask people for references. Ask if you can meet in person. That sort of thing. If they have a website that they can direct you to, trying to get that sort of information. We certainly understand that people use personal financial advisors and wouldn't discourage anyone from doing that, but we want to make sure that folks understand that DRS doesn't provide that sort of service. Sometimes some of these situations, people had been sort of not explicitly saying that they worked for DRS, but that they might have a relationship with DRS, or that they're very knowledgeable about the DRS retirement plans. And so we just want to make sure active employees and retirees are aware of that they need to be skeptical. The general science or general rule around this is that older folks or retirees are generally more skeptical than our active employees. I can speak from experience after working with a number of folks who've got these sorts of calls. Our active employees were maybe not as careful as they could have been. So that is it for my prepared remarks. I think I see a few additional questions have come in, but please feel free to type questions in the chat and I will do my best to respond to them. Just give me 1 minute here to read. Great. Really good question about what does DRS disclose under public records requests. It's a really good question and something that folks need to be aware of. We are a public entity. We are able to provide. We do provide information when requested. Generally, what we're receiving are broad requests for names, mailing addresses, kind of what I would kind of consider data phishing for groups who want to send out maybe or maybe make phone calls about financial planning services. We will not give out bank account informations, mailing address. I'm sorry, we won't give out beneficiary information. Anything that's considered personally identifiable, so things like social security number, of course, we won't give out. But if somebody contacted DRS and wanted to know what your pension amount was or how much service credit you had or what your average salary was when you were working, that would be information that they could receive. It's very rare that we get that sort of detailed like person by person request, unless it's like from a news organization who's trying to write a story maybe about somebody who recently retired, or there's some scandal associated with somebody who recently retired. So generally not super common questions, super common requests. More generally, we will receive kind of like batch information, like who's receiving the largest pension in the state, or what are all the pension amounts. So a couple more questions about PERS Plan 1 COLA information. So there was a requirement for the Select Committee on Pension Policy to study a Plan 1 permanent COLA. My understanding of that is that the bulk of the work is going to be done next year, and they'll write a report that will be provided to legislators or legislative committees regarding basically the cost. What would the cost be of a Plan 1 COLA? My understanding is it's in the billions of dollars. So there's questions about finding funding for that and what it could look like long-term ongoing. But that's my understanding of where the status of the study is that the primary work is going to be done next year. Oh, a good question about, when PERS 1, I'm sorry, when PERS has PERS 1 fully funded, will the retirees receive a regular ongoing COLA? I think that's one of the things that study is looking at, because so I was mentioning earlier about Plan 1 being close to fully funded. That is assuming no COLA going forward. If there is a COLA going forward, that would reduce the funding status of Plan 1. And so I think that's part of the discussion that will be covered in that legislative study. How can a COLA be provided and keep the plan at fully funded, or get the plan back up to fully funded within a certain time period? Oh, good. Very good question about public records requests. Yes, if an individual's information is requested, we certainly reach out to that individual. When we get bulk requests for like all public employees' years of service or something like that, we make notice on our website, which is another good reason to be signed up for notification alerts from DRS, because we don't have an easy way to notify 800,000 or 900,000 people individually. So if it's a bulk request, we'll put up some sort of notice on our website. But definitely, if they're individual requests or small group requests, if people are called out by name, we will notify those folks individually. I'm probably a little bit out over my skis on this one. It's not a process I deal with a ton, but my understanding is a person can go to court and ask for an injunction to not release the information. There's a process for that, and it's one of the reasons we want to make sure people are notified that their information is being released. I think I have answered the questions that I have seen come in on the chat so far, so I'm going to pause again for a second and see if there's any other questions that are coming in. Jacob, I don't see any other questions. I don't know if anybody has asked you any questions directly or anything else that you wanted to pass on, but
No, that looks like you got them all covered. So, yeah, thank you, Seth. That was a very informative presentation, and appreciate you taking the time to answer all these questions. So,
I appreciate it, and thank you. And if additional questions come up and you filter them through Jacob, he can certainly send them off to me. Yeah, very specific personal question there. If somebody dies, how much would my beneficiary get? You can contact DRS, and we'll have to look at that individually based on how long you've worked and what your contributions were. But we can certainly do that.
all right. Yeah. So any further questions that you guys might have after this, feel free to send me an email, and we can go ahead and get that forwarded on to Seth, and so he can get back to me, and I can go ahead and get his response back to you. So, everyone got a copy of the PowerPoint in their email. This is recorded and will be made available for members in some capacity. I will be addressing that with Derek next week. So, Seth, thank you again for giving us your time today and for your preparation on this PowerPoint, and giving our members this opportunity to have a live session for just RPEC folks. So that's great. Thank you.
Perfect. I appreciate it. Thank you. See y'all later.
All right, everyone, take care. Thank you so much.